The most important hormone to regulate is the stress hormone. That is cortisol. Cortisol is the master hormone. And cortisol is released anytime we are in what I call protection mode. That is your nervous system's fight or flight response. And when your nervous system is triggered into fight or flight, what happens is you release cortisol into the bloodstream, and cortisol has a job. Cortisol's primary job is your survival. And he or she who has the most stored body fat is who survives the longest without food. Welcome back, friends. I'm your host, Sherry Shaban, and with each episode, I am honored to be your coach and guide in the journey to make peace with food, fall in love with fitness, and ultimately yourself. My intention in each episode is to help you release the old story of who you are and step into the one you're always meant to be. We'll challenge conventional diet and fitness culture and understand the importance of tuning out all the shoulds they tell us to do and tuning into our own inner wisdom instead. What you focus on, you create more of. Through these conversations, you'll shift your focus from what you're supposed to be doing to who you want to be, so that health and fitness and ease around food is not just what you do, but who you are. And if you find that this conversation resonates with you today, then I want to invite you to join our free Make Peace with Food Facebook community at myfoodfreedomlifestyle.com, where you can connect with me and my team directly and access all the free trainings and resources we have for you so you can regulate your nervous system and make peace with food. And then also remember to share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear this today. The links are in the show notes. If you're listening to today's episode and you feel like food and dieting and weight and body image has completely taken over your life, has complete power over you, I hope this conversation brings you the comfort and inspiration that you're searching for. And remember, you're not alone. Healing is possible. If you've ever felt like you know exactly what to do, but you just can't bring yourself to do the things that you know to do, then I want to invite you to join me during my 3-day Break the Cycle Masterclass, where I'm going to be talking about how to overcome binge eating and emotional eating and how to regulate your nervous system so that you're no longer engaging in these unwanted eating behaviors. And this isn't a 3-day masterclass on weight loss, by the way. This is a 3-day masterclass on understanding how to break free from the cycle that's resulting in the side effect of weight gain. And that's the big difference, because you know this by now, that repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is called insanity. You know that dieting doesn't work. You know that it's not about hard discipline and getting yourself to be on another plan or hiring a nutritionist to tell you what to eat. You know all the things. Heck, I bet you can even write a book on all the things. But what you do want to uncover is, why is it that you continue to sabotage? Why does it feel like you're always on the wagon or off the wagon? And that's exactly why I'd love for you to join me during this 3-day Break the Cycle Masterclass that I'm giving completely free. Now you can register at sherryshaban.com/break the cycle. Again, sherryshaban.com/break the cycle. Again, it's completely free to join. And the goal during these 3 days together is to uncover why it is that you continue to engage in unwanted eating behaviors, even though you know exactly what to do. sherryshaban.com/break the cycle. All right, now let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about the master hormone. It is so funny because when you are scrolling on Facebook or on Instagram or reading all these fitness blogs, they're always talking about make sure just to watch your sugar levels and watch your carbohydrate levels or watch the amount of fat intake that you consume, but hardly anyone is talking about this hormone. And hormones are messengers for the body. Hormones tell the body exactly what to do. They tell the body to have more energy. They tell the body to slow down metabolism. They tell the body to digest things in a certain way. They even affect our mood and our emotions. And so these messengers that are being released all throughout the day, depending on how we are interacting with our environment, actually get to decide what we're going to do with the foods that we consume. And the greatest way that we can measure how we feel is through our emotions. Our emotions are indicators of how we're feeling about things. That's why sometimes you'll notice if you are in a diet mindset, you feel really good about yourself when you ate the good food or the right food. And you feel really bad about yourself if you ate something that made you feel guilty. And so if you start to monitor your life in terms of mood and emotions, and really focus on how can I regulate my emotions, which really means how can I regulate my nervous system and balance my hormones, everything starts to change. And I had to learn this, unfortunately, the hard way. And this was actually probably the greatest gift that I ever received. And some of you already know my story. I like to share my story because I want to tell you that I've gone through so many things in my life that really should have put me on the sidelines for self-care, or the sidelines even to say yes to myself, or to put myself first, to be able to honor my physical body. And why I like to share my story too is because I get a lot of, "You're so lucky, Sherry, it was probably genetics," or "I'm sure you don't have to work so hard to be where you're at." And it is true. I don't have to work so hard because I'm not focusing on fitness and exercise only as the gateway to having a health state that I feel vibrant in. What I actually focus on is more of what's going on up here. Health really is shoulder up. Everything that's above the shoulders is actually what controls your health. And health starts in the mind. I shared this on the last masterclass. Your health starts in the mind. Weight release starts in the mind. Emotional regulation starts in the mind, and regulating your hormones also starts in the mind. But that's not what we do. We punish ourselves through exercise, and we try to find a better diet, and we try to find a better way to eat, and we restrict more, and we feel super guilty about it. And it seems like our entire life, the meaning of our entire life, is about losing weight. The moment you release this mindset that all I think about is weight release, or I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is how am I going to release weight, or will I eat this and gain weight, or constantly measuring your worth with what's on the scale and what your size is. And I promise you, the moment that you move away from that and you really start to focus on how will this affect my hormones? How will this affect my nervous system, i.e. my emotions? And how will I feel eating these things, being around these people, sleeping this many hours, and maybe even taking certain supplements that can help my metabolism in terms of regulating my nervous system? How will all of these things impact my health versus calories in and calories out? And if you move away from that paradigm and move into the one we're talking about, I promise you everything will change overnight. And my journey really began in the health and fitness space. It was probably 2001, something along those lines. And I really got into the health and fitness space because my big goal was to overcome chronic back pain. When I was growing up, I was super involved in sports. I was a child athlete. I was a competitive swimmer. I was the varsity player. I was obsessed with exercise and with sports and with fitness. And that's how I always saw myself. That was my identity. I was kind of like the tomboy growing up. And everything changed for me when I was 16 years old because I was struck by a car. I ended up damaging my spine. I went on to have back surgery and then had to live with chronic back pain as a regular part of my life. And at that time, the doctors told me, "Sherry, you're not playing any sports again. You have to make sure that whatever you do isn't going to stress your body, and you may end up having a difficult pregnancy later. There could be more complications in your back. So you really have to make sure that you have zero impact on your back. So physical activity is out of the question." And I listened to this advice for a long time until I found myself in my early 20s. So I'm going to say that was around 2001, 2002. And I woke up one day and just wasn't able to recognize myself. I was spending time and hanging out with a completely different social crowd, not the one that I would have ever seen myself be around. And I was engaging in a lot of vices and social events that really wasn't resonating with who I was. And on top of that, I was relying on pain medication to get through every single day. And that day, I remember it was so clear. It was, this is not me. I just can't do this anymore. And that's when I decided to sign up at a local gym. And I had zero clue around what I was doing, except I was just going to commit to being there every single day and copying everybody around me. And that's what I did day in, day out. And by the way, at that time, I was doing a master's degree in chemistry of all things. I had a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, and now I was doing my master's degree at McGill. So I wasn't even in the fitness space. But here's what happened after a few months of being super consistent and showing up. All of a sudden, my back pain was gone. I was able to do things that I wasn't able to do before, such as run. I bought a treadmill. I started running 5 minutes at a time until I worked my way up to running an hour completely pain-free outdoors. And this is what avalanched my health and fitness career. And I decided I was going to drop out of my chemistry degree and I was going to go back to school and learn everything there was about health, about nutrition, about exercise science. And that's exactly what I did. I got a bachelor's degree in exercise science. I went on to become a certified athletic therapist. I became an osteopath. I took every single course I possibly could on prenatal and postnatal training, HIIT and TRX. And I also learned everything I could around nutrition. And that's where really all of the problems started. All of my dysregulated relationships with food began. And what I ended up finding myself doing is secretly binge eating. Because here's the thing, when you get into the fitness space, there are so many different diets and every single one is right and every single one is backed by science. And remember, I am a science nerd. So I saw the science and I followed it. So that meant when I first started, I was counting calories, and then I went to low fat, and then I went to the Atkins diet, and then I went keto, and then I went paleo. And then when I opened CrossFit gyms, it was the zone, it was macros. And I started becoming so confused around food and how to eat. And I had become a secret binge eater. And here's what really happened, because it happened so slowly until one day you wake up and you realize, okay, something is wrong here. Like something is not right. It used to be a cheat meal. So it used to be a Friday night or a Saturday night cheat meal. And it would be something I'd be looking forward to all week because I was super strict all week. And I was such a perfectionist. And the moment that I would have my cheat meal, well, because I'm already here, and of course I'm getting this insane dopamine reward from having been so restrictive, from having being so apprehensive and excited about this cheat meal, to suddenly giving myself this flooded dopamine in my brain, I wanted more. And so that one cheat meal that used to be controlled suddenly became completely out of control, and it would last the entire weekend. And then it just became this pattern where I'd clean things up on Monday again. Everything would be super clean and super strict. And then by the weekend, I would be right back into that cycle. And why I'm going to share this with you is because this is setting up the stage to talk about our master hormone today. And I want to know, do you know what the hormone this is? What hormone are we talking about today? What do you think is the master hormone? But we're oftentimes led to believe that the master hormone is estrogen or maybe even insulin. But that's not true. Actually, cortisol is the master hormone. And this is why nervous system regulation is so important to me. And, I shared with you that I had opened a CrossFit gym, and I actually had opened 2 CrossFit gyms. I was running 2 CrossFit gyms and running a personal training business. And at that time, while I was struggling secretly with my unwanted eating behavior, I was also writing out meal plans, which I thought were badass meal plans for all of my clients, helping them release really rapid weight in 6 weeks and sometimes even less time. And then I started to notice that the behavior would always come back. So they would be very, very successful as long as they followed this plan. But then the moment that this plan was done, the moment that this diet was done, they would resort and revert right back to old behaviors and not only regain all the weight back, but sometimes even more. And I was so perplexed by this. Why was it that they couldn't just follow this structured meal plan? Why was it that it was so temporary, that after this whole entire duration was over, that they were likely looking forward to, then all of a sudden they would just go back to eating the exact same way that they used to? Well, here's the thing. What we never ever addressed was nervous system. what I thought was the right pathway to releasing weight and transforming your body, which of course back then I believed was through exercise and through nutrition, was part of the puzzle, but it was a very small part of the puzzle. The bigger part of the puzzle was learning how to regulate your hormone. And the most important hormone to regulate is the stress hormone. That is cortisol. Cortisol is the master hormone. And cortisol is released anytime we are in what I call protection mode. That is your nervous system's fight or flight response. And when your nervous system is triggered into fight or flight because of things that we're going to get to in just a moment, what happens is you release cortisol into the bloodstream, and cortisol has a job. Cortisol's primary job is your survival. And he or she who has the most stored body fat is who survives the longest without food, right? Think about it. If we were in a famine and we had absolutely no access to food, then the person who has the most stored energy would be the person who's able to withstand that famine the longest. And this is what happens anytime that you have cortisol in your body. And today, unlike some of the past masterclasses, I want to give you a little bit more around what the role of cortisol really is. Because if you understand that having cortisol in your body not only brings down your metabolism, completely slows it down, but also ups your craving and favors fat storage, then what you're going to start doing is, instead of focusing on what you're eating, you're going to start to focus on how can I regulate cortisol. That is going to be your primary function, because if you're able to regulate cortisol, you're going to be able to regulate all of the other hormones, all of them. And I'll get in that in just a moment, but first let's talk a little bit more about cortisol. So cortisol's primary function is survival. How does it do that? Well, it has to ensure that there is sugar in your bloodstream at all times, because just in case you suddenly need to take fast action, you need to punch someone, you need to hit someone, you need to escape, you need to climb, you need to run, you need to hide, you need to take an immediate action. Well, you're going to have the quickest form of energy circulating in your bloodstream so that you can do that. And that quickest form of energy is glucose. And so cortisol's job is to make sure that there's going to be blood sugar available for you at all times. And so the way that it does that is, first of all, it slows down metabolism. And the reason it slows down your metabolism is because it interferes with your thyroid hormone. So it's going to say, hey, thyroid gland, don't convert T3 to T4. T4 is your active thyroid hormone that's responsible for increasing your metabolism. And so as you decrease your metabolism, you're going to have more T3. You're not going to have that active form of T4. And that's where you're going to start to feel more lethargic. You're going to start to feel like you don't want to expend energy, because you have to conserve energy. When you're in survival mode, you have to conserve energy. It's kind of like what happened in the pandemic when we were all hoarding the toilet paper and the food at the grocery store. We were trying to store as much as possible. So if we're trying to store as much as possible, then we also don't want to expend as more than that we need, right? We don't want to expend more than we need. So therefore, we have to slow down metabolism. So cortisol does that by interfering with thyroid and making sure that the metabolism is going to be slowed down through that action. Then cortisol also wants to make sure to ensure that there is blood sugar always available, that you're always going to be consuming foods that's going to give you immediate access to energy, which is in the form of simple sugar. And the way that it does that is by increasing your hunger hormones. So that's why oftentimes I'll hear, well, I'm not even hungry and I don't know why I still keep eating. Well, when cortisol is high, your hunger hormone is high, and it's getting you to have more craving. It's getting you to always feel like you need to eat. And then on top of that, it's going to suppress your satiety hormone. That's the hormone that tells your body, hey, we've had enough food, we can stop eating now. But it's going to suppress that. It's going to block that. And when it does that, you're going to notice that you're always nibbling on things. You don't have a lot of regulation or feedback around your hunger cues and your satiety cues. And so cortisol is just doing its job, which is really just to get you to consume more foods and to make sure that the foods that you do consume are high in instant energy. And so again, this is just biology. Like once you start realizing that you can't fight biology, but what you can do is start to work with your hormones, it now starts to become ease. Because if your cortisol is high and you've got all of these hunger hormones that are causing you to want to eat more, and then your satiety hormones are suppressed, meaning you can't even feel when you're full, and on top of that, you're trying to diet, I mean, this is going to be misery. This is going to be misery, which is why we tend to find ourselves emotionally eating and binge eating. And it's exactly why I fell into that trap. And why I wanted to share my story with you is because I know the science. I share the science. I talk about the science, and it happened to me too. And I feel you, and I know exactly what you're going through, especially when you know exactly what to do, but you're not doing the things that you know to do. And so this is cortisol's job. Cortisol's job is to keep blood sugar high, and it's to make sure that you never feel full. So it always feels like you're a bottomless pit. And it also wants to ensure that you slow down metabolism so that you don't have to use any excess energy that you don't need to use or waste really at the moment. I shared with you that cortisol's job is to keep blood sugar high. It's to keep blood sugar high. And so it does that by increasing the hunger hormones, which leads you to want to eat the foods that are higher in sugars and refined carbohydrates. And that's a natural thing because that's exactly what your body needs in the moment when it's in that emergency situation. But as a response to that, what your body has to do is release another hormone that has to balance out that blood sugar. It's got to do something with the blood sugar because all this blood sugar floating around in your body becomes very dangerous. It's very harmful to the body. And it could lead to neuropathies, it could lead to blindness, it could lead to Alzheimer's, and many of you know this as diabetes. And so what we release from the pancreas to help manage the blood sugar is insulin. Insulin's released, and it starts to manage the blood sugar by bringing it into storage and then converting whatever's extra into fat in the fat cells. And so cravings also arise, not just from that hunger hormone that's always going, but cravings also arise when your blood sugar is constantly spiking and then dropping. So that drop becomes a craving. So you have a craving because cortisol gave you a craving through the act of ghrelin and its other friends. And then all of a sudden your blood sugar rises, either because the liver just deposited a whole bunch of sugar in the bloodstream, or you consumed something that had a lot of sugar in it. And so insulin is secreted, and insulin's job is to lower that blood sugar. And the higher the spike, the more insulin is released. I mean, these are soldiers. They have to match what's available. They have to do their job. And so the more you're doing this all day, so spike, sugar spike, insulin spike, and then drop in sugar, drop in insulin. And then again, as soon as you drop insulin and drop blood sugar, you get another craving, and then you have another sugar spike, and then insulin takes care of that. And then there is a drop in the blood sugar, you have another craving. And so this constant yo-yo, or this constant roller coaster of blood sugar spikes and drops also causes cravings. And again, as a result of that and overdoing that, we start to see other mechanisms in the body break down. And that's where we start to see something called insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is our body just no longer responding to insulin in the way that it used to. And this comes from fatigue. The system is exhausted because it's been doing this for a long time. It's been doing this for years. And I mean, I don't have to tell you, because likely if you've experienced binge eating or emotional eating, you know this already, that the sessions get more and more intense and you consume more and more foods. And that's how it was for me. Like I shared with you earlier, it started with a cheat meal, and then all of a sudden I was able to consume more foods and able to consume more foods and able to consume more food. And so the quantity starts to increase, and that's what happens. We start to get numb to that quantity that used to be sufficient. It used to be a piece of cake, now it has to be two. It used to be 2 pieces of cake, now it has to be 2 pieces of cake and 4 cookies, and so on and so forth. And then you start to see these episodes grow and expand more and more. And, I shared before and on my previous masterclasses that binge eating isn't just you consuming a large quantity of food in one sitting. It could even be throughout the entire day. Whether you sit down for 30 minutes and consume a tub of ice cream and a box of cookies and a bag of pretzels, or you have that throughout the entire day, the result is the same. The result is the same. And so I want us to move away from labels and just watch patterns, because that's really what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to break patterns. And hormones are patterns, and they respond to our behavior. And our behavior is going to dictate which hormones are circulating, and thus which messages are going to be given to the body. And so once we've fatigued our pancreas and insulin system, and now we have insulin resistance, we're going to start to see a lot of other mechanisms start to break down as a side effect of that. One of them being the thyroid hormone. Again, thyroid is responsible for regulating your metabolism, but it's hard to keep up when it's constantly high energy, low energy, high energy, low energy, and that also gets fatigued. And then the other thing that we start to see is estrogen dominance. Estrogen dominance. This is what we see in PCOS. This is what we see with women who have really bad PMS or go through a lot of menopausal symptoms, because estrogen dominance is a result of the liver not being able to detoxify estrogen fast enough and not be able to regulate the estrogen that's actually in the body. Because when cortisol is high, it's affecting what's happening in the liver. It's constantly asking the liver to release more glucose. And so the liver is not able to metabolite estrogen and to be able to release it and detoxify the body of excess estrogens. And estrogen that we have in our body is not just what we make, it's also what we consume from our environment. Those are actually the more harmful estrogens. And those estrogens can be in the form of phytoestrogens coming from plastics or soaps and conditioners and creams and all the products that we consume through our skin and also through our mouth that we ingest. So if we're purchasing groceries that are always wrapped in plastic, so produce that's wrapped in plastic, or drinking out of plastic bottles, we're constantly introducing estrogens in the body. And when our liver is not able to detoxify, then that's where we start to see estrogen dominance. And other symptoms, of course, of estrogen dominance could appear. There could be hair loss, there could be acne, there could be a lot of other things. There could be obviously weight gain, because estrogen, again, is promoting that. It's also helping us retain a lot of water. So again, I want you just to see this cascade of events all coming from cortisol, So cortisol is the master hormone. If you focus on this one hormone, everything changes. And this is exactly what I see all the time when I work with people in the Make Peace with Food program. And I work with people who've gone through major traumas, whether that is sexual abuse that's been repressed for many, many years, or that is a loss of a child, or that is a tragic loss of a partner, or maybe even a tragic loss of a business. Or maybe even I have a person who has a child who is an addict. And so these are major traumas. These are major difficult things to deal with on your own. And when our cortisol is high and we start to become adapted to it, we start to adapt to that level of chronic stress, we're constantly locked into what I call, again, protection mode. It starts to become our normal. It starts to become our baseline. And then it's hard to really see the difference. And what's really interesting is somewhere around 45, maybe around 40, 45, 50, that's where we start to hear a lot of people saying, well, it's all due to perimenopause. That's why I've suddenly gained all this weight. It's my hormones. It must be my menopause hormones, and I haven't been able to release the weight. It's true what they say. As soon as you turn 40, that's it. You put on the weight. It never comes off. I hear all of these things. The funny thing about that age, so around 40, maybe to 50 years old, the funny thing about that age is that's also the time in your life where you start to take on the most amount of stress. It's, and you can look this up. This is all statistics. It's during that period in our lives where people are getting divorced, or people start to lose their parents or watch their parents get ill, or they get an illness themselves. And of course, if you're in the sandwich generation like I am, you are taking care of your kids who are getting older, and you're also taking care of your parents. And so I just had this conversation with my neighbor the other day, and my neighbor actually grooms my dog Shadow. And I was getting my dog groomed, and we were having this conversation about how we're the sandwich generation. So his kids are almost in their late 20s, still living at home. And then he's got two ill parents that he takes care of. And so the amount of stress that he still has to support the children, still has them at home, and has to also, on top of that, take care of his parents, that's a lot. And when I was having this conversation with him, he's overwhelmed. I mean, he's just trying to deal with all the things. And every time I ask him, hey, how are you doing? He's like, surviving. And that's the response. The response is surviving. And how ironic is that? Because that's exactly what we're talking about. That is the hormone that's circulating through your body. It's your survival hormone. It's cortisol. And you could only imagine how stressful that can be. And so your 40s, between your 40s and your 50s, look at the events that are happening in your life. They're matching up with extremely stressful events. And it's not just your menopause hormones. It just so happens to be your menopause period of time, or perimenopause. However, what's even more important than that, because remember we said health is from the shoulders up. Health starts in the mind. It's also what's going on in your world. And that always has a much stronger impact on your body, on your health, on your hormones than anything else. Now, I spoke a little bit about how cortisol affects all of the other hormones, but what I also want to add in here is cortisol has a couple of other functions, okay? One of the functions cortisol has is that it blocks the prefrontal lobe communication. So what does that mean? That means our prefrontal lobe, that's the part of the brain where we can think rationally. It's where we can make decisions. But when cortisol is high, it blocks that area of the brain. And so what we end up doing is we rely more on our reptilian brain, our primitive brain that responds to hunger, anger, loneliness, and tiredness. And it's that part of the brain that just reacts to environment instead of responds to environment. So that's why sometimes we kind of just have this like wake up moment after a binge or after a moment of emotionally eating. And we ask ourselves like, why did I just do that? Like, I know better. Why did I do that? I didn't want to do that. I didn't intend to do that. And it's also why sometimes when those cravings kick in, they start to feel super, super vicious. And it's almost like it's screaming inside, and you can't stop it. And the only thing that you can do is just follow the craving. It's impossible to interrupt. And again, the reason for that is because when you have cortisol high in the bloodstream, it is blocking that prefrontal cortex. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to cortisol before we start moving into how can we now regulate cortisol? Now that you understand its effect, let's talk about how we can regulate it. But the last thing I want to share with you about cortisol is actually, it actually promotes atrophy. So you have two systems in which you can either put on lean body mass or release it. And what happens when cortisol is high is that it starts to break down muscle tissue. It starts to create atrophy in the body. And so when this happens, when muscles start to break down the body, and this response is catabolic. This response is catabolic because what the body wants to do is use everything it possibly can to create glucose, and one of those really important macronutrients that can be converted into glucose is protein, and your muscles are made of protein. So when cortisol is high in the body, it's also going to start to break down muscle tissue to create glucose. And that process, that catabolic process of this breakdown of muscle tissue results in atrophy. And when we have less lean body mass or less muscle tissue, then this also is going to influence our metabolism. It's going to end up slowing down our metabolism further. So we have a slowdown in metabolism because of the thyroid hormone and cortisol's effect on the thyroid gland. And on top of that, cortisol is catabolic. It breaks down muscle tissue. And the result of that is going to be less muscle tissue. And muscle is where we burn the majority of our calories at rest. And not to talk too much about calories, I'm trying to super simplify this conversation, but not to talk too much about it, but the less muscle tissue we have, the less ability we are to burn calories or utilize energy at rest, which is also what we see when we diet chronically. When we diet chronically and we go into a major calorie deficit, we also eat away at that lean body mass. That's what we're seeing on the scale, actually. We're actually seeing our muscle waste away, our muscle atrophy, and then it gives us a disadvantage because when we go back to eating the way we used to eat, we have less of an ability to utilize that same amount of energy, and more of it ends up going into storage. So those are the last couple things I wanted to add. And just super curious right now, I'm just to get a sense of where you're at. Are you clear now as to why you have to control cortisol and you have to really focus on cortisol as that master hormone? So let's talk a little bit now about how can we really regulate cortisol? How can we regulate cortisol? So some of the things that I had already shared earlier through the conversation is really going to help us get clear around how we can start to take action right away. So we know that cortisol is released anytime there is a feeling of threat in the environment, whether that is a response to a physical threat, a metabolic threat, a hormonal threat. It could be a psychological threat or an emotional threat. And this is all, of course, as I say threat, this really means any feeling of discomfort. If you feel emotionally uncomfortable, or there is somebody in your environment that is very triggering for you emotionally, or even psychologically, or if you have a physical injury, or of course, if there is a trauma. So anytime your body is sensing discomfort or unsafety, it's going to release cortisol, which is why talking about environment is so important. Talking about environment is so important, and that's how we started our conversation today. What can you do in your immediate environment right now to make changes? What can you do? And this is not me suggesting that you should break up with anybody or get a divorce, but there could be conversations that could be had. And there could be support that could be had, for example. So thinking about what you could do in your immediate environment, whether that is at work, whether that's at home, whether that is your relationships with your kids or family or loved ones, how can you start to make these changes? It becomes incredibly important to really start there. And then the other thing too is, and this is the big one that I stress on, is your character. It's your character, it's your behavior. That need for perfectionism. That need for perfectionism is another really big one, because when you start to see things as polarized, as being good or bad, and you're only good if you do certain things and you're bad if you do other things, that's how you're going to always trigger this feeling of unsafety, because you're either always really good or always really bad. There's nothing in between. And most of the time, especially when we are perfectionism, that thought process, that internal dialogue that we're constantly having, that narrative is always, I'm not good enough, I got to do more, it's still not good enough, I still didn't do well enough, I still got to be better. And it's this constant feeling of lack. So getting into that negative self-talk is going to be so important, so important. And this is why when people tell you, hey, you want to just de-stress, go listen to some relaxing music or meditate or do some yoga or maybe even just do some breath work. And that alone does not help you regulate your nervous system if your self-talk is always negative, if it's always very charged. If you're always triggering your nervous system and triggering cortisol release simply by how you view yourself, by how you view the world, by the constant narrative that's up here. So if you're always doing that and you're doing yoga, it doesn't really matter. So they really have to be hand in hand. You have to focus on the shoulders up. Remember, and I told you this, that the way that we actually address cortisol is not through the body, it's through the mind. And this is why most people get it wrong. Most people get it wrong because they tell you to go stretch or tell you to go do something relaxing, but they never focus on that inner dialogue, that sense of perfectionism. And of course, the unresolved trauma. And trauma is your response to something that happened to you that made you walk away with a particular impression. And that impression or that pattern, that meaning that you gave that incident is constantly on repeat. And if it's constantly on repeat, it means that trauma is still very much alive within you. And you're still using that. You're still using the belief systems to operate in today's world, even though that trauma may have happened 5, 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago. You're still recirculating and still re-experiencing that trauma. And that's constantly going to put you in protection mode. And this all, by the way, all these things that we're talking about, again, I call them the loop. I call them the record. And I see this often in many of my clients. We'll start having a conversation and they'll start talking about this one thing in their lives. And then all of a sudden, it's like I've heard it, and I've heard them say this loop and this record many times. I've heard the replay many, many times where they will get into one topic and all of a sudden it'll lead them into another topic and then lead them into another topic. And it's tied in with emotions and beliefs. And we all have this. And I used to have that record also that used to play. I used to have my own stories about things that were happening in my world. And in one moment I would start thinking about this one thing in my life, and all of a sudden it would lead me to think about this other failure that I had, and then this other failure that I had, then this other thing that's going back, then this other thing that's going back. And before I know it, I've just gone down this rabbit hole of record after record after record after record of how terrible I am, how terrible my life is, how everything is not good enough, how I'm not doing things right. And for me personally, that was always when it came to my kids. I had this constant record that would play when it would come to my kids, that I always felt like I wasn't a good enough mom. Because when they were young, I had my gym and my schedule was a little bit all over the place, and I wasn't able to do the arts and crafts with my kids like all the other moms did, or bake cookies. And I always took that as a personal failure. And so that was the record. It would start with, oh, I'm not a really good mom. And oh my God. And when they grow up, they're going to have this. And then they're going to, and it was projecting these worst case scenarios. And then before long, I would start thinking about how I was an entrepreneur and how I wasn't good enough and how I wasn't doing things well enough and how I needed to do things more. And then it would go into another tangent of another thing that would, and all of it just breeding that same emotion of not enoughness. And that not enoughness, I call it the scarcity mindset. That's the scarcity mindset. And so if you want to lower cortisol, the very, very first thing you have to do is you have to focus on the quality of your thoughts. You have to focus on the quality of your thoughts, because the quality of your thoughts equates to the quality of your life and the quality of your health. And so if you've got that not enoughness all the time, you've got that sense of perfectionism, which I saw in myself when it came to eating behavior. I'm such a perfectionist. Everything has to be exactly right. So imagine when I was counting my macros, it had to be precise. And if it wasn't precise, if I ate 1 or 2 grams over, that would drive me nuts. And then that would lead me to an unwanted eating behavior because I felt like I failed. It was, remember, when you're a perfectionist, it's black or white thinking. It's all or none. It's completely polarized. It's either good or bad. And a couple of grams of macros over was bad. And that felt like a personal fail. And so you have to start there. You have to start there. And then the next thing is to work on your sleep quality, because sleep also is going to be really important in restoring emotional regulation and also making sure that all of your hormones are balanced and you're able to balance your circadian rhythm. And we already spoke about restrictive dieting and intermittent fasting abuse, for example. You have to, again, think about how you're triggering that scarcity mindset every single time you're thinking, I'm not allowed to eat this, I can't have that, and I'm not allowed to eat this because I have to lose weight, and I'm not good enough because I have to lose weight, and I don't look good enough because I have to lose weight. All of that is triggering your cortisol levels. It's triggering protection mode. And here's another one I want to talk about too, is exercising and chronic exercise. We think more is more, but more is actually less when it comes to high intensity exercise, or not allowing your body to recover when you're feeling sore or you had a pretty intense workout. And that could be relative to the person. We're all different in how we respond to training and what our body is adapted to do, but recovery is so important because exercise actually triggers high cortisol. So when we exercise, we increase our cortisol. And so when we're over exercising, we are constantly living in elevated cortisol levels and never giving our body a chance to come down. So imagine what that looks like now when you are over exercising because you have to lose weight, you are under eating, so you're not nourishing yourself properly because you have to release weight. And then on top of that, you've got this negative self-talk and you're so angry at yourself, and every single time you pass a mirror, you have to say a negative comment. So imagine that soup of cortisol that's circulating through the body because of all of these things that you're doing. So you think you're doing the right things, you're exercising, you're in a calorie deficit, and you're not recovering, you're not balancing your cortisol. And on top of it, your negative self-talk is also contributing to elevated levels. So this is so important. This is so key. And this is actually what I constantly see in my practice. The women that I work with, this is the formula. This is the formula. And it's either that they have unresolved trauma and they've gone through so many rounds and rounds and rounds of restrictive dieting that they have completely given up on the thought that health and fitness could be possible for them, or they are over-exercising, undernourishing themselves, and living in a very high state of stress through negative self-talk and through the things that are happening in their world. But either way, whichever person that I'm sitting down with, I'm not looking at just what they're doing. I'm looking at the whole person. It is a whole person approach. Who is this person? What was their history? What are they doing now? What are their goals? And more importantly, how do they view themselves? Are they the hero of their stories, or are they the villain, or maybe even that supporting character that we spoke about? And that becomes so relevant. And that's why this approach is so completely different. This approach is so completely different. And I always say this, that if you repeat the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, it's called insanity. It's called insanity. And so the key takeaways that I want to give you today, the ones that I want you to walk away today with, is number one, cortisol is not the enemy. Cortisol is not the enemy, but its chronic elevation is. The chronic state of protection mode is the enemy. So cortisol is very useful because it can give us superpowers in the brief moment. It can really help us get things done. It can make us sharper at doing things. It can give us stronger superpowers. However, when we stay in the state for a long period of time, that's where we start to see all of the other mechanisms in the body and all of the other hormones in the body get impacted. But I don't want you to walk away with thinking, oh my God, my goal here is to never be in protection mode. No, you will naturally be in protection mode. Protection mode is a natural state of the nervous system. However, what's not natural is always being in it because of what's going on from the shoulders up. And then number two, fat loss is not just about willpower or macros, it's about stress regulation. So fat release actually starts with cortisol regulation. That is the key takeaway. Fat release happens with cortisol regulation. Number three, emotional eating and belly fat are often symptoms of chronic stress, not character flaws. They're symptoms of chronic stress, not character flaws, which of course we believe is when we're struggling with weight, when we are struggling with emotional eating. We're so hard on ourselves. We're so angry at ourselves. We're trying to stop it. And we feel like there's something wrong with us. It's broken. And we start to diagnose ourselves with all these things. But it's actually a byproduct of what's really happening with our hormones. And so eating and emotionally eating and excessive overeating and binge eating and eating in a way that's not aligning with your goals and how you want to approach food, and if you feel like your relationship with food is dysregulated, then it's not about your character, it is about your hormones. And then the final thing that I want you to walk away with is healing is the stress response. So healing the stress response, nervous system regulation, sleep, like we spoke about, nourishment, and then of course focusing on your mindset. That's going to be the key to changing your body composition.